Well, we'll go ahead and get started. And I'd like to welcome everyone to our virtual town hall today on PFAS, the forever chemicals. And we're here to discuss why this is an important water quality, environmental, and human health issue here in Alaska. And we really appreciate you all joining us today. We'll have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end, and people can go ahead and start posting questions into the chat if you'd like. We're also going to be doing a drawing at the very end. If you stay with us, we're going to do a drawing for a free copy of Rob's book, Exposure. So please stay with us. And I'd like to welcome, and we're so pleased and honored to be joined by Rob Bilott, who is featured in the film Dark Waters and also in The Devil We Know. He will be introduced shortly by Representative Tarr. We'd also like to thank and welcome the legislators and their staff who are on the call today for your keen interest, for your leadership, and your passion on this issue. We really deeply appreciate that. We're joined by Representative Garen Tarr, who's co-chair of the House Resources Committee, Representative Sarah Hannon, chair of the House Arctic Policy Committee, and co-chair of the House Community and Regional Affairs Committee. We have Representative Tiffany Zolkowski, her staff, Katie Giorgio, and Representative Zolkowski is chair of the House Health and Social Services Committee. So thank you, Katie, for joining us to represent her. And Senator Jessie Kiel, who's a member of the Senate Resources Committee, is represented by his staff, Kathy Schlingheider. And Senator Scott Kawasaki, we're pleased to have his staff person, Robin O'Donoghue. So thank you again all. And I'd like to thank the ACAT staff who helped to put this all together. Courtney Owen, Margaret Tarrant, Nick Reardon, and also Shauna Toma with Northern Compass Group, the amazing person who's going to be moderating our question and answers in the chat. And I'd like to again thank all of our speakers. I'd like to thank Participant Media and Swank, the film distributor who made this possible, and Safer States, which we are part of the coalition to pass protective state policies throughout the country. So after this brief opening and welcome, and we're going to hear from Kelly McLaughlin from the Gustavus PFAS Action Coalition, Representative Tarr will introduce Rob Bilott, and then we'll have statements from each of the legislators or their staff, and then a closing and invitation to action and questions and answers. So again, thank you all so much. The reason we're holding this town hall is because safe drinking water in Alaska and community health are fundamental human rights. We know that these PFAS chemicals are a class of nearly 5,000 chemicals used to make products grease and stain resistant. They are commonly used in cookware, food packaging, apparel, carpets, and firefighting foams. They're widely used in many industrial processes as well and discharged into our waterways. We know that these chemicals are highly toxic at exceedingly low levels, and they've been linked to a number of serious health problems, and I know Rob will talk more about these. These include cancer, hormone disruption, immune system suppression, and reproductive health problems. And scientists are increasingly concerned about how exposure to PFAS and other toxic chemicals can worsen the impacts of COVID-19 because they suppress the immune system. PFAS contamination in Alaska has been confirmed at nearly every site that has been investigated where PFAS-based firefighting foams have been used. And we know to date that PFAS have been discovered at over 100 individual sites in nearly 30 locations. In Alaska, the dispersive use of PFAS in firefighting foams at airports and military sites has contaminated the drinking water of communities from the far north, from Utqiagvik all the way to southeast Alaska. And we know of at least 10 communities that have PFAS in their drinking water at levels that are deemed unsafe by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And we know that this is really the tip of the iceberg and that this number will unfortunately grow as we discover and do some additional sampling. PFAS pollution is a public health crisis in Alaska and throughout the country. We need strong leaders, and we appreciate the leadership of these legislators that are on our call today. This is a pernicious problem that we have to solve together. And other states are really stepping up to establish health protective drinking water, to phase out PFAS in firefighting foams and other applications. And we really call upon our state legislature in the upcoming session to take this on and to pass legislation that will protect public health. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Kelly McLaughlin, who is the chair of the Gustavus PFAS Action Coalition. Kelly and GPAC have been tremendous leaders, not only in taking action in Gustavus, but Kelly and GPAC, I think, are definitely state and national leaders in this struggle to hold the polluters accountable and to protect drinking water and public health. Kelly, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Hopefully my internet holds up for this. So I'm in Gustavus in Southeast Alaska, and our contamination comes largely from the fire, mainly on the local level, although we have been working on the state and national level as well, as much as we can. The Gustavus PFAS Action Coalition was formed in December 2018. Through our initial interactions with the state agency representatives, it became very evident that the state of Alaska had no coordinated response plan to the contamination that they were uncovering. While certain individuals within state agencies definitely showed a desire to be helpful, their hands were really clearly tied. And the overarching message that we received was there's nothing we can do. There's a lot of sorry. So we formed largely in order to speak with a unified voice, to write letters to tell the DEC, DOT, DHSS, etc., to tell them what they could do. We had some pretty clear ideas. We worked with local organizations and their representatives to bring clean water to our kids at the school. The local school's water was contaminated at 44 parts per trillion, which was under state levels, so there was nothing they could do. We formed to offer our community everything that the state was not. The National Park Service owns the well at the Gustavus School, and they worked quickly to provide GAC filtration for the school's water. GPAC worked with the state's risk management division to install rainwater cisterns for those who wanted them and qualified as contaminated. We collaborated with Alaska's Fish and Game to collect bear and moose tissue to check levels for PFAS content. We tested chicken eggs, chicken tissue, held and cultivated berries and vegetables from contaminated areas, and we're currently awaiting results for 2 species of salmon that begin and end their lives in the river that flows through our local plume. We also organized a pilot study with enormous assistance from ACAT, Indiana University, and St. Lawrence University to determine PFAS levels in the blood serum of Gustavus residents and to correlate those levels with PFAS levels in the participants' drinking water. And there was a profound correlation. And I think that's the first time that that's been done. So that was really amazing to see. We've gathered information. Whoops, sorry. We've gathered information, we've written many letters stating our needs regarding PFAS contamination in Gustavus and in Alaska. The culmination of this effort, I think, is to take these experiences and the data that we've collected and to establish legislation that ensures medical monitoring for those that were exposed, to establish very low limits of allowable exposure through drinking water, as several other states have done, and protect the future of Alaska and the health of Alaskans by completely ceasing PFAS use and cleaning up the messes that we've made. This event, thank you for everybody who's put this together, and thank you, Rob, for being here to help our state. And this event is the kickoff for our 4-part Zoom series, our Alaska PFAS Summit. So we hope that you all will be inspired to join us for the subsequent meetings as well. Back to you, Pam. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. You and GPAC are just so amazing and tremendous, and it's just great to work with you. I'd next like to give the floor to Representative Tarr to introduce Rob. Representative Tarr.
Hi there. Thank you so much, everyone. It's really a delight to join you and get everybody fired up. This is the season. We need to be fired up and act. You heard Pam initially talk about some of the threats that PFAS chemicals pose for the environment and human health. You heard Kelly talk about contamination. And so you might be thinking, how did we get here? And that's really the story that we're going to tell tonight. And if you haven't seen the movie Dark Waters yet, that's really the story that is told, and sort of the punchline for me and the takeaway of why all of us need to be in this conversation tonight, and why people that have the job that I have need to be ever vigilant in our work, is that there are bad actors. And it's not all of the folks in the chemical manufacturing, it's not all people in industry, but there are these cases where there are the bad actors, and we have to be there. We have to be ever vigilant in our work. We have to be doing the oversight work. That's why it matters, you know, how did we get here? How did we get to a place where Kelly and citizens in her community have contaminated drinking water? How do we get to a place where state regulators are telling them there's nothing they can do? You know, how do we get to a place where some of their food is no longer secure and safe for them to eat? So we really have to learn the story, and this is just one story, and I think it's so important to use as that representative example so that you understand why an organization like ACAT has to exist and has to be always doing this oversight work, always looking into what's happening, always fact checking the information that we get, and then why you have to have policymakers that are also doing that same kind of work, so that we're always putting in place the kind of policies just mentioned that include the medical monitoring, the safe drinking water, the contamination cleanup, and, you know, and then ending the use of any of those chemicals. Pam and I, it's fun here. We've worked together for years and years and years on things, and we're here on Zoom, but I could actually probably throw a stone to her house almost. We live very close together. But this is just one of the chemicals that's impacting Alaskans. And, you know, you're going to learn a lot about this tonight. This is a very serious forever chemical. That's why we need to take action now. And I hope you'll be inspired by stories like Kelly and our neighbors here in Alaska that really need our help. But it's not the only one. And we work on other flame retardant chemicals. We work on chemicals in personal care products. So this is if this is the first time you're opening the door to learning about these issues, you know, please be ready to learn a lot. We have a lot of work to do together. And that is why it is so incredible that we would have somebody of Rob Bilott's caliber to join us. It was just several months ago that I had the privilege of introducing him. And we were talking before the community joined us. When Rob came to Juneau was the last public event that most of us attended, because the following week was when everything shut down because of COVID-19. So there we were in Juneau in a big room, 100 or more people there to watch the movie together on the big screen, like we did in the pre-COVID times. And it was a great learning experience, and people became very motivated. And I think you're going to have that same reaction after you hear from him tonight. And so if you haven't seen the movie yet, you know, once you hear from him, it's cool. You're meeting a movie star here, right? He's played by a real movie star in the movie, of course, but you get to meet the real live inspiration, and just someone who we owe a debt of gratitude, because what you will learn is this has been a passion of his. It has taken years and years to prove these bad actors, and we just have to be so thankful for the work he's done. To date, he has secured benefits of more than $1 billion for clients adversely impacted by PFAS contamination. That just literally gives me chills, because so often, as the story Kelly told, people get kind of left and don't really get what they deserve in terms of the cleanup, or, you know, have what they deserve in terms of the impact of their human health. $1 billion for his clients, critically important for all of us. He's forced accountability and change that protects lives. And still, he's still working on it, because there's more work to do. He is currently an attorney and partner at Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister, called Taft for short, because those other two are a mouthful. But currently, I'm still practicing law and doing this work to help us all understand and make the important change we need in our communities. So Rob, thank you, thank you, thank you. Welcome to the virtual Alaska event, and just thank you so much for being willing to share your journey and knowledge with us. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much. You know, it's really an honor to be able to be here with all of you. I wish I was there again, live in person there to talk with everyone, but really appreciate the opportunity to get together with all of you, even if it's in the virtual way. You know, we've been hearing about these PFAS chemicals and the importance of sharing stories. And, you know, that's exactly what I'm hoping we're able to do tonight. You know, when we talk about PFAS, you know, we're talking about a class of chemicals that have hundreds, if not thousands, of chemicals in this class, all completely man-made toxic chemicals that, you know, none of which existed on the planet prior to World War II. Yet now we've got hundreds or thousands of them, and they're being found in drinking water all over the country, all over the world at this point, in soil, in the air, in animals, in vegetation, and in humans. Virtually every person on the planet, including babies being born to this day with these chemicals. And this is something, you know, that didn't happen decades, you know, back in the 1800s. This is something that happened during our lifetimes. Over the last 70 years, unprecedented worldwide contamination on an unheard of scale. And you sit back, and as we look at what we're dealing with now and the scope of this problem, the magnitude of it, and you wonder, how did this happen? How did something like this happen in the United States during modern times? And you know, luckily, we had the opportunity to work with wonderful folks at Participant Media, who were able to put together the film Dark Waters, which gave you a great synopsis of this story. I hope that some of you have had a chance to see it, and if you haven't, that you're able to watch it at some point. Because what you see in that film is really the story of how we all found out about these chemicals. And it's not that nobody knew about them, unfortunately. Yeah, there was a lot known about these chemicals. You may hear them referred to nowadays as emerging contaminants. But the only thing that's emerging is our awareness and understanding that they're out there. They've been there for a long time. These chemicals have been used in a massive variety of different consumer products. You know, not just Teflon, but it's stain-resistant waterproof clothing and carpeting, fast food wrappers and packaging, microchip coatings, firefighting foams, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But lots of chemicals used in many different operations all over the United States. And the way we found out about this really was from one individual out in West Virginia named Earl Tennant, whose cows were dying one day, and who calls me, you know, trying to figure out what's going on. And he's something to do with a landfill next to his property where he sees white foaming water coming out. His cows are dropping dead. Their teeth are turning black. They've got tumors. And it's not just the cows. It's the wildlife in the area. It's the deer, the fish, the frogs. And he thinks it's also affecting himself and his family. You know, and when we took that case on back in 1998, when Mr. Tennant first came to us, you know, we had no idea what we would uncover. We thought this was a really kind of relatively isolated incident. There was a problem on this small farm out in West Virginia. We could probably get to the bottom of it pretty quickly. And what we learned, much to my surprise, really changed my entire view of the legal world, of the scientific world, of the regulatory system. But what we found out was, you know, we had this entire world of unregulated chemicals. These PFAS chemicals, you know, have this unusual ability to stay in our environment virtually forever because they share this unusual carbon-fluorine bond that's common to all of them. And it makes it so when these chemicals get out into our environment, it's almost impossible to break down under natural conditions. And PFOA, one of these chemicals, the one that's featured in the film Dark Waters, you know, has been characterized as something that will be there after humans are off the planet. it takes that long for it to break down under natural conditions. Well, the only way we found out about this was through taking on this case for Mr. Tennant in West Virginia. And what we learned through that case, unfortunately, was you had this entire world of unregulated chemicals that were being made and manufactured decades before the US EPA even came into existence, decades before the first federal regulations and rules governing chemicals even came out. Even though the companies that were making these chemicals fully understood the unique nature of the chemical, not only did they have this unusual ability not to break down out in the environment, but they had also this ability to get into us, into living things, to stick in our blood, to build up over time. And the companies were studying, even before the EPA came into existence, they were doing toxicity studies, testing these chemicals, and fully understood, that these chemicals were persistent. They would stay in the environment, stay in us, bioaccumulative. They would build up in our blood over time, toxic. And unfortunately, there was active steps taken to conceal that information from the rest of us for many, many years. And it took this farmer in West Virginia, demanding that we get to the bottom of what was happening on his farm, that we discovered that these chemicals even existed. And not only that they were in the drinking water that these cows were drinking in West Virginia, but not just that they were in the drinking water of the entire surrounding community, and which led to litigation you see in the film with the members of the surrounding town, Joe Kiger and his wife, coming together and on behalf of everyone in that community saying, we want answers to exactly what stuff is, what it'll do to us, we want it out of our water, which led to some of the first litigation in the world about these chemicals, where we've got more documents from the companies and finally we're able to start not only understanding ourselves, what had been hidden from the rest of the world for decades, all of the internal studies and information that the companies had about how dangerous these chemicals were, but we started sharing those with the regulatory agencies, with the scientific world, trying to get that information out, because what we were seeing showed this was a massive public health threat. This chemical and related chemicals were not just in the water in West Virginia, not just in the drinking water in the community there, but in the water likely of thousands, if not millions of people across this country and the entire world. What you see in the film, the story Dark Waters, is what it took to get that information out about just one of these chemicals called PFOA, the chemical that was made by 3M and used by DuPont to manufacture Teflon in West Virginia. And what it took under our legal system and our regulatory system and the way science is developed for that community to actually get information out about what the chemical, not only what was already known, what it could do, but then what they had to do in order to actually get it stopped, to get clean water, to get scientific confirmation of what was happening, the burden and the hurdles that our legal system places upon communities and those who are exposed. Essentially telling everyone who's exposed to these chemicals, you're going to be the guinea pigs. You're going to have to sit back and we're going to see what it does to you. And it's your burden to prove that these chemicals are causing you harm. And what you see in the film is that this situation in West Virginia was one of the few times where the community was able to do that by using tens of millions of dollars from the company that was causing the problem to actually get the science done, to get it confirmed. And because of that, 69,000 people in that community coming together, providing blood samples, giving information to scientists to confirm that the chemical in the water could cause 6 different diseases: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, preeclampsia, and high cholesterol. And once that information finally came out, that's what kind of finally triggered increased understanding among the regulatory agencies as well. They finally started requiring places to test for that chemical all over the country. That started in 2013 and 2014 after these scientific links were confirmed. And that's when we started to find the contamination that's likely been there a long time, all over the country, including in Alaska. And what we learned was not only was this one chemical, PFOA, all over the place, but these related perfluorochemicals, things that had also were very similar structures, things like PFOS that were used in making things like firefighting foams. Those firefighting foams, petroleum-based, so they call it aqueous film forming foam, or AFFF. It's the kind of foam used to battle petroleum fires. They were used at airports and military bases all over the country. So once this information came out and the EPA finally came out and started establishing guidelines for these chemicals, testing finally began across the country, looking for these chemicals. And we're starting to find them, of course, outside military bases, outside airports, particularly where foam was used. And we finally have this growing awareness that this stuff is out there. And not as those two chemicals, PFOA and PFOS, it took 20 years for that information to come out, for us to understand what we now know and to finally start regulating and phasing them out. Well, what happens is the companies making them cut a few carbons off of them, and suddenly they're new. Instead of these C8s, like PFOA and PFOS, things with 8 carbons or C8, they cut 2 carbons off, call it a C6, and suddenly it's a new chemical, and we're told the whole process starts all over again. Oh, we don't have enough information about these to do anything. Where are the human health studies? In other words, communities now have to do what the people in West Virginia did, another 20 years. To this new replacement chemical, for example, for PFOA called Gen X, it's already in the water in Wilmington, North Carolina. And what are we hearing? We don't know enough yet. We need to do studies. So now we're seeing incredible activity all across the world by regulators and scientists saying, we can't do this whack-a-mole game with these chemicals where we study one and we finally have enough information and then it's tweaked and we have to start all over. Let's address this whole group as a class. So you see movements now to try to regulate PFAS collectively, all of these at one time, so that those of us who are exposed aren't continued to be used as the guinea pigs. And one of the things I'm trying to do is, and I mentioned this in the book, Exposure, where I try to put all of this history together for people in one place, is I have filed a new case where I'm seeking to bring a class action on behalf of everyone in the country who have these chemicals in their blood, and to require appropriate testing and studies to be done and confirmed by independent scientists to tell us exactly what these things are doing to us, but to have the companies pay for it. Because right now, communities all across this country, including in Alaska, are having to pay to filter their water, to have to get bottled water, to have to figure out what to do with this stuff in the soil, in the ground, in their crops, in the wildlife. The communities, the states, the water providers should not be the ones having to pay for that. So we're working with states and water providers and communities all across the country, trying to make sure that the people that did this are held responsible. The companies that made these chemicals, knowing they would get out into the environment, they would stay there, they would get into our water, into our blood, they should be paying for these costs. So one of the things we've been seeing right now is a lot of activity. As you heard mentioned, there's activity been going on in different states at the federal level, trying to hold people responsible, the right people responsible, so that water providers aren't having to do this, the states aren't having to do this, communities aren't having to pay for this. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of pushback going on because these are incredibly high costs. You know, I'm hoping that when people see the film, and I'll stop talking, I'm going too long, but when people see the film Dark Waters and see what one person, Mr. Tennant, or one family, or just one community coming together, the power of that and what can be done. You know, you can make change. You can get things changed. You know, what's that individual, that family, that community, you know, coming together, standing up, speaking out, and demanding that things be done and demanding that things change. It can happen. We've changed the way things are done. We tried some unique things with PFOA, with this independent science panel. It can happen, and it requires people sharing these stories, talking about these stories. People like Participant, being able to come in and actually show the world what it was like for people in a community like this, what it was like for the real people that had to go through this so that other communities don't have to do this. The power of having a story like that out there. And, you know, and then having this great opportunity to talk with folks like you, everybody listening here, hopefully to start sharing these stories and realizing this is the same story for all of us. We're all dealing with the same chemicals. We're all dealing with the same problem, and we should hopefully all be working together. And there are resources now being made available where different community groups can link up, can share information, can talk about these stories. So I really look forward to the opportunity for everyone here to talk about this tonight. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Rob, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, not only for joining us, but for the decades of work, for inspiring us, for spurring us to action. And we look forward to finding ways that we can collectively work to address these problems. But we so deeply appreciate all of your work, and it's just inspiring. So we very much appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And next, I would like to turn to Representative Sarah Hannon.
Thank you. I would like to say I'm delighted to be here, but I guess I'm saddened to be here to know the tragedy that has befallen our nation and so many of our communities. I am a freshman legislator and ran for office in 2018. And you think you know some things about issues you're going to work on. And then you find out that you don't know anything. And one of the very first issues in transition from the representative I was replacing community of Gustavus has to do with PFAS. I didn't know anything about PFAS. We've all seen Aaron Brockovich as a movie and understand that there's potential for chemicals to invade our lives and people to deny it's causing any problems. But within days of being elected, I'm reintroduced to Kelly McLaughlin, who I'd known as a teenager, but now as a young activist mom, providing me a stack of homework and insight into just one community's experience with the devastation of a PFAS exposure. And to anyone who knows Alaska, the irony of it being the community of Gustavus having to exist on bottled water and clean water in a place that is held up in every poster and movie about travel to Alaska as one of our most pristine locations, whose community organization was about the ability to control recyclables in their community, to now depend on bottled water so that they would be safe. That irony is not lost on people who understand Alaska. And it is that case of you start to learn a little bit about one location and only to be faced quickly with PFAS pollution is all over. It's across our state. Alaska depends on small rural airports. It happens that Gustavus has a big airstrip, but it's a small town. And we know that our topography and water table tell us that we've got PFAS problems in hundreds of locations. We just haven't tested for them. And then to be struck by governing agencies, told by the Commissioner of Community and Environmental Conservation that we don't need to test baseline data, that we all have background levels of PFAS. And to know that, of course, to have learned that we all have PFAS, and there is no science monitoring what my background level is versus a child drinking it in their daily drinking water. It's devastating, it's frightening, but with constituents like Kelly, making sure that we have stayed on point. Senator Kiel, his staff is online, and we'll talk about the fact that we have some legislation to make Alaska accountable to Alaskans, to make sure that we clean up and provide clean water across Alaska, and that we should hold the polluters and the manufacturers accountable, because the cost of it is is unfathomable. We do not have the money to address the needs. We've written a letter to ask the governor to join the multi-state litigation against manufacturers. Governor of our state has been reluctant to do that. We have allies across the state. Senator Kawasaki will be able to talk about, they may have been the first community district to be able to identify PFAS pollution in their water and lakes. It, of course, is one that from the day of learning about it, you only find that there are more and more networks of people who've been working on this. From attending a conference for first-term legislators, women legislators last fall, and meeting a cadre of women from New Hampshire who had all been just elected to the New Hampshire House, where they call themselves the Women Warriors. And, you know, that they ran for office on the singular issue of water pollution in their town. They happen to be representing manufacturing towns, and have suffered from it. You know, they have some of the disease evidence that Rob spoke to. I also have had the opportunity, for whatever reason, I'm in a network of, I've been called to participate in a couple of university programs, one at Yale with a group of environmental activist students who contacted me over Alaskan timber issues and concern about the future of trees. And I immediately said, the future of trees is nothing if our water is all toxic. So let's talk about PFAS pollution. And gave a lecture via Zoom to Paul Smith College, which is up in the Adirondacks of New York, whose specialty is resource management. Lectured 2 university classes. The theme was federal versus state regulation of issues. Neither of the professors whose classes I was talking to had even understood the connection or lack thereof of EPA regulation, and that when states like Alaska default and say, we'll turn to the EPA for our regulatory levels and authority, that it gives us no protection. As Rob has spoken to, every time there's new research, what we know is that we're not being protected by the government agencies that we've depended on to provide us the science and the knowledge to keep us safe. I could continue on to downer, but let's just say we're all going to need to fight this fight together. We need more communities to understand that it is a lifetime commitment and that we have to change this, because we will all have a deadly path in front of us, more imminent than is right now, if we don't address PFAS pollution and safe drinking water. Alaska has 30 communities with no water systems whatsoever. And that doesn't include Gustavus, where people are dependent on wells. And we still don't have much political will to put the investment in the money and the science to fix the problems we know are there and try and get ahead of it and put some preventative measures and research in place. But Alaskans frequently pull miracles out of a hat, and we sure hope that we can solve the PFAS issues that face Alaska before we have the problems that West Virginia had to experience. So thank you for educating me. I'm especially appreciative of Kelly McLaughlin making sure that there is always homework to be read on PFAS education. And Rob, the movie version really helps for those of us who can't get all our homework done. So to both of you, thank you for the education you provided me as a lawmaker. And we'll keep pushing this ball uphill, because we have to do it. We have to improve drinking water standards in Alaska and across the nation.
Thank you so much, Representative Hannon. We look forward to working with you and to hold our agencies accountable to protecting drinking water and public health. And again, really appreciate your leadership on this. Thank you so much. And next, I'd like to invite Kathy Schlingheider from Senator Jessie Kiel's office to say a few words. And Jessie has also been very much a leader in the state legislature on this issue. Thank you, Kathy, so much for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm Kathy, staff to Senator Kiel, and he sends his apologies. He can't be here today. I'm not as good a speaker, I'm afraid, but I'll be brief. Senator Kiel represents a portion of Southeast Alaska, including Gustavus, and we are also so grateful to Kelly McLaughlin and the Gustavus PFAS Action Coalition and Pam Miller and activists around the state who have really been tireless advocates, helping to educate us and educate others about how important this issue is. Senator Kiel and Representative Hannon wrote a bill that Representative Hannon was just speaking about. As I'm sure all of you know, we're in a tight fiscal spot as a state, but keeping Alaskans healthy and ensuring everyone has clean drinking water is a basic obligation of the state. So they're going to be reintroducing this bill in January, and we're going to need to talk to people around the state about why this is so important, and we need your help doing that. So please do reach out to us. I think Kelly and Pam can probably give you our contact information, but our office number is 465-4947. We need your assistance. Thank you again to everyone in this call for all your work, for letting me join the conversation today. And I look forward to working with you over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much for being with us today. And please convey our deep thanks also to Senator Kiel. We know he's on a hunting trip on Kodiak, so we wish him good hunting. He's out of range of computers, and so hope he's having a great trip. Next, I'd like to invite Katie Giorgio from Representative Zukoski's office. Katie, we really appreciate you being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. Again, my name is Katie. I'm staff to Representative Tiffany Zolkuski. She is the chair of the House Health and Social Services Committee, so I staff her on that. And thanks again, everyone, for participating in this today. We were approached, our office was approached very late last year or very early this year about the possibility of having Rob Bilott come up and highlighting this issue of forever chemicals. And to be honest, at the time, myself and Representative Zolkuski were very unfamiliar with the issue. And so we got to work on educating ourselves. We watched Dark Waters, which again is a great sort of intro to the topic if you don't know anything about it. And you continued our learning and research from there. And we were just frankly shocked by everything. And then to learn about Gustavus, I had actually had an experience prior to all of this. I had the opportunity to go to Gustavus for a wedding a year and a half ago, and I was told before we went that Gustavus has a problem with their drinking water and that we would have to bring water with us. And that was so surprising to me, because here you have this pristine, beautiful community in Southeast Alaska where you can't even drink the water. Like, that was really odd to me. But again, at the time, I didn't really understand what the issue was until later. And so I think for our office, the really important thing was to elevate the topic to make sure that more people understood what was happening in Alaska and around the country and world. And I think it's really important, like I think Representative Hannon was saying earlier, that we have to educate our legislators. And so that way, because like they were saying, the government agencies have been failing us. And so it's time for intervention through legislation so that we can protect the health of Alaskans. That's our duty as legislators to protect the wellness of our communities. So again, thanks again for including us today, and we really appreciate all the work that you do, and let's get out there and spread more information. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Katie, and please convey our deep thanks as well to Representative Zukoski. We very much appreciated her holding the special hearing in her committee last March and giving Rob an opportunity to speak to that committee. And so please give our thanks. Next, I'd like to open questions and discussion. And I see that people are posting a lot of questions in the chat, which is great, and comments. I'd like to call your attention to a couple of things that Margaret posted in the chat. Late last year, we published an investigative report called Threats to Drinking Water and Public Health in Alaska. So there's the link to that details in about 80 pages of public records that we culled through, thousands and thousands of pages of public records and other sources of information, including the scientific literature about the PFAS problem in Alaska and around the country and around the world. So please check out that resource. It's a very good and relevant investigative report, and the link is there. And I've also, posted a candidate guide to PFAS, also the link to that, and that's particular to Alaska. And that's a way that we can all hold our legislators accountable for taking action on this very critical public health issue. So please check out those two resources. And then another one that I just posted is to the Division of Elections. We have an election coming up, in case anybody didn't know it. So just to ask everybody to please exercise your right to vote. So now I'd like to give the floor to Shauna, who's been moderating the chat, so that we can open it up to questions and discussions. Thank you, Shauna.
Thanks, Pam, and thank you for so many people for being here this afternoon and evening for you, Rob, on Eastern time. I did note that there are looks like there's several reporters online, and I'd like to offer you that if you have questions or want to do follow-up conversations with either legislators or some of our other speakers here, we would love to connect you. There's plenty of background information we could provide also. So we can follow up. Just send a note in the chat to me or to everyone if that's what you have to do. We'll make sure we follow up too. I've someone asked in the chat, how can Alaska, this is for Rob, I think, how can Alaska join the class action lawsuit, the new one that you're talking about? How can Alaskans affected join that lawsuit?
Well, at this stage, the case is still at its initial stages, where we are right now briefing the issue of whether it can proceed as a class action on behalf of everyone in the country that has these chemicals in their blood. So the court hasn't decided that yet, but if it does get certified to proceed as that kind of class action, then the folks in Alaska that have that in the blood would be part of that class. It just, we haven't got quite there yet. We're unfortunately with the pandemic, a lot of things have kind of slowed down in the legal world.
Okay, well, keep us informed. We'll make sure the communities and individuals know. When we need to swoop into action, we can do it. Thank you for that. I've had a couple questions about sewage, the sewage waste in Fairbanks. There was a question about that too on the list. In Fairbanks, there's been PFAS found in the sludge that was scraped off the sewage that people use for gardens and such. Also looks like Seward, Alaska also has some real problems. The question, and maybe it's for Pam or maybe you, Rob, if you've heard of this in other places, how does sewage get transfer to water and to animals and to food where people are trying to use those products, and how does that happen?
Well, I'll jump in real quick and then I'll defer to Pam, but this is a problem that's actually really nationwide. Historically what happens is a lot of times the waste from all kinds of different manufacturing operations or different industrial processes flow into a wastewater system. And that system develops sludge or biosolids of some sort. In a lot of places over the years, historically, almost as a means of trying to encourage recycling, those biosolids or sludge were given away or given to farmers and all that, then applied them as fertilizer on fields or on agricultural fields. And unfortunately, that's been found to have contributed to PFAS, because what happens is if there's PFAS in the water, the wastewater that's going into the wastewater system, it kind of gets consolidated and almost concentrated in that biosludge and solids. So when that's spread out on the fields, there have been situations where they find fairly high levels of PFAS then in either the vegetation that's grown, or it could be taken up by the animals that eat it, or it could filter down into the groundwater under the field. So it's something that has been unfortunately going on for a while, but I think it's only kind of just now being recognized, and it's an issue happening all over the country right now.
Wow,
Thanks,
thank
Rob.
you.
And,
Yeah.
and this is a very critical issue that I think is just starting to come to light here in Alaska. We detail some of this in our investigative report about the situation of the contaminated sludge that went into the compost in Fairbanks. So you can read about it in our investigative report. I think this is a huge problem that is not well understood yet, especially here in Alaska. We know that it is definitely a problem in many places, as you said, Rob, around the country. We know that PFAS are released into sewage sludge, and in Alaska, so much of our sewage sludge and sewage waste is discharged directly into our waters. Cook Inlet, the Gulf of Alaska, you know, throughout the state and interior Alaska and freshwater lakes and streams. So this is really something that we need to not only gain an understanding of, but hopefully stop this at the source.
Thank you, Pam. It gives me the creeps. We have a question for Representative Hannon, maybe Representative Tarr. This is about what will the legislation we have currently in the House, or the one that we talked about last session, there's some more details you can share about what that legislation will do?
Well, so that legislation is dead, but we'll be reintroducing it in January. But if anybody wanted to read the bills, the Senate bill was 176, House bill 204. 240, sorry, my dyslexia kicking in. It sets actionable PFAS levels tied to the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, because currently we defer to the EPA levels. And what we've learned in this short time is those aren't good enough. The EPA comes after the fact and says, okay, now we'll lower it. But we want actionable levels set by people who are working in researching the dangers. It requires that the Department of Environmental Conservation provide safe drinking water to communities that have suffered from pollution of PFAS. It preserves the polluter pays, but there is an exemption from that if you use firefighting foam for an actual fire. You're not the polluter, but in many of these cases that we know of, this was testing of firefighting foam at airports that led to the pollution for many Alaskan communities. It would also require that once that federal aviation requirement to do the annual testing has gone away, that the state of Alaska no longer have PFAS foams used at our airports. We need to stop using it. They've already said we'll stop testing. There is a carve out. Thus far, the state fire marshal has said there is not in the oil and aviation industries a satisfactory alternative in the case of a real fire. So there is a carve out that oil industry continue to use it in response to fires. And then the final is that, because we know that communities with small airports have PFAS foam because they've had to, in response to FAA requirements, to have it on hand. It asks for DEC to receive back that foam so that across small communities, it doesn't sit there in a barrel or a tank and get accidentally emptied, spilled, or used. So let's ban it and let's give a place to go with it, and that the state accept that back. Those are the main points from the bill. Of course, like all bills, there's a lot of legal language describing those.
Great, thank you, Representative Hannon. There's another question. How much PFAS, or how much of this class of chemical, how much is safe for people? What's a safe level?
Well, I can jump in on that, and I think that is the huge debate going on right now. And in fact, what you see is, date has been on looking at what's the appropriate level in drinking water. And so most of the activity has been to try to come up with a drinking water level. I think that the first people to do that actually were DuPont back in 1988. And the level they picked was right about the level that you could detect it in the water back then. And that seems to be almost kind of where the rest of us are now heading, the regulatory agencies. As you heard, the US EPA came out with a drinking water guideline, not an enforceable standard, but a guideline of 70 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS combined. That was in May of 2016. And since that guideline came out, a number of states have been looking at the science and looking at the data and recommending that that number be a lot lower. So we've seen states, for example, like New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts just recently, Michigan, California. And what we're seeing is those numbers are coming from 70 down to 20, 13, 10. Now some places are in the single digit. And so we're almost coming back now to that level of where you can detect it. Then we're starting to be concerned about it, because unlike a lot of chemicals that we're exposed to that we might be able to get rid of the next day, these we're more concerned about how long we're exposed to them. You know, it's not like, okay, as long as I've drunk beneath this level today, I'm okay. You really are concerned about the long term. That's why you're seeing these levels go down so low, because the scientists and the regulators are looking at the fact that it stays in us so long that there's the concern about how much of it's building up over time, because even the littlest bits can stay in and build up. So it's a difficult class of chemicals to deal with because of that, because of this persistence. So I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing these numbers come down as low as they're going right now. And I think we're going to continue to see that pattern.
Thank you for that. That's long needed. There's another question about the military use. And I know there was some action taken in the last year's National Defense Authorization Bill. I don't know who's up to date on that, but is the military still using these things? Has it been banned? And what's the update with that? I don't know, Pam or Rob, who has that?
Is that Rob?
You know, there's starting to be activity to try to phase back on the use of PFAS. For example, as you heard with firefighting foams, it's been one of the main focuses to date. Trying to encourage, first of all, the ability to switch to alternatives that don't have, at a minimum, the PFOA and PFOS. Now there's a lot of debate right now about whether some of the other PFAS with shorter chains, like we were talking about, the C6s and C4s, or whether it needs to be phased out completely. But right now, there's the focus has been on the foam. And one of the other concerns I think that the Department of Defense has expressed in a lot of the military and federal government agencies, they don't necessarily agree to do anything as far as cleaning anything up until the federal EPA actually adopts a standard or actually says that it's hazardous under federal law. Even if a state is saying, we have these rules and regulations. So you're seeing sort of this tension develop across the country between states and federal facilities, whether or not they're actually going to be required to go in and do something. So it's become a real mess, frankly, out there, and particularly for communities that are near military installations. It's very frustrating. Because there are all kinds of weird legal rules that say things like the government can't be sued or they're immune. So there are all kinds of additional hurdles, that you have to go through. And then you hear entities in the government say, we can't go in and clean this up or do this because it's not regulated. And we're only allowed to spend our money under the federal rules to deal with regulated materials. So it's like this catch-22. And the communities are the ones who are stuck in the middle of that in the meantime, having to figure out how they get the clean water, how they pay for it, how they deal with that, while the agencies and all fight with each other. It's incredibly frustrating. But again, hopefully with events like this, people raising awareness that that's what's happening, that hopefully we can devote a little more resources to getting that straightened out.
Great, thank you. Well, I can see the need, well, why you're pursuing a class action and put pressure on the private industry. Well, we're going to round this out. We have one more question from a great champion of this effort who has testified many times, and that's Dr. John Kennish. You're a great friend of ACAT, from what I know. And Dr. Kennish asked, how can we establish regulations to prevent the use of chemicals without certification of safety? So,
you know, this is, it's one of the, it's a great question. And it's one of the things I really try to explore in my book too, you know, is just how did this happen? How did something like this happen with PFOA? And how did our current system for regulating chemicals and our current laws allow this? You know, and unfortunately what we see is the current system really focused on new chemicals coming out and requiring certain testing of new chemicals, but really didn't require much for the things that were already out there, the tens of thousands of chemicals like PFOA that had been in use before these laws came out in the 1970s or later. There was an attempt to kind of beef up that law in 2016, the Toxic Substances Control Act, to require a little more aggressive upfront testing and requirements. And I think the jury's still out, so to speak, on how effective that is. You know, and there are a lot of folks out there that are recommending we follow more of what they call the European approach, you know, requiring a lot more rigorous testing and activities to be done before something can come out on the market, as opposed to allowing it out and then telling the community or the exposed people they have to prove it's harmful. Requiring it to be proven safe first. And that's one of the big debates going on right now on the legislation side.
And if I could just add so that people, this is Representative Tarr, would recognize if they hear the language, when we talk about that as a position, we call it the precautionary principle.
Right.
And a lot of us have advocated the precautionary principle as a policy alternative, that we should in fact have the policy, you know, reflect that precautionary principle, because we wouldn't find ourselves in these situations. But of course, we have powerful interests that we're up against, and so that's why the citizen involvement is so very important.
That's a perfect message to wrap up on, Representative Tarr. Thank you. We all know what we need to do. Someone just made a comment about the EPA. Well, that EPA person is appointed by the president. So, all right. Well, Pam, back to you. Thanks everybody for the wonderful questions and conversation.
Thanks again to Rob. Thanks to all our wonderful legislators. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. And this is the call to action part, because clearly we have a lot of work to do together, and it's going to take all of our hearts and minds working together to solve this problem, the PFAS problem, as well as chemical exposures to other harmful contaminants. And just to say yes to the precautionary principle, yes to addressing chemicals as a class, not on a single chemical by chemical basis. We've done this with flame retardants. We need to do this with PFAS. We need to act at the state level. We need to act at the federal level. ACAT is involved at the state, national, and international level to promote safe alternatives and to get legislation in place to regulate these chemicals. So please join us, and please vote, and vote safely. We need bold action to solve this public health crisis, and we need all of you to work with us to ban the use of PFAS chemicals in food packaging, as well as firefighting foams, textiles, and other non-essential products, to hold these manufacturers accountable, to provide safe drinking water for our communities, to ensure that communities that are contaminated have access to blood serum testing and medical monitoring, as Kelly mentioned, to also ensure that disposal of PFAS does not further contaminate our communities that are historically already overburdened by pollution. And this includes addressing the sewage waste problem that people have raised. And finally, to adopt health protective drinking water standards, enforceable drinking water standards that are not just guidelines, because we know that, as Rob mentioned, the guidelines that EPA has established at 70 parts per trillion are way too high. And some scientists have said that we're seeing health effects at the low part per trillion and even 0.1 part per trillion level. So these are chemicals that affect us very profoundly at exquisitely low exposure levels. We'll be following up this call with an action alert email, ways that you can get involved. And between now and when the legislative session begins in January, as Kelly mentioned, we're planning some sessions, some additional educational and action sessions. And so please keep an eye out for those. We'll be providing additional information. Again, we invite you to bring your hearts and minds to this collective work. We really do need people to contact their legislators to let them know that this is a very important public health issue and that it's necessary to pass legislation in this upcoming session. And before we close, I'd like to turn to Kelly to see if you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make. And again, thank you so much for all of your work and for GPAC.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate everybody being here, and I did want to say that a lot of the questions that were asked will be discussed more in depth in our upcoming sessions. So if you go to gpacalaska.org or go to ACAT's website, we'll probably post both places when the sessions will be. We had a schedule and then we recreated our schedule. So there will be upcoming events, I think one per month in the next 4 months. And we would love to have you guys involved. There's somebody just asked the question, will we watch the movie? The movie, there's a link to it. Maybe Pam can talk about that more before we all leave. But thank you all so much, and we hope to see you soon.